It started with one man in Tunisia. His name was Mohammed Bouazizi. He sold fruit on the street because he could not find other work. On December 17, 2010, a police officer took his fruit cart away. Mohammed was very sad and angry. Later that day, he set himself on fire in front of a government building. He died from his burns on January 4, 2011. Mohammed Bouazizi's action made many people in Tunisia very angry. They were tired of problems like not having jobs and unfair treatment by the police. Big protests started in his town and then spread across all of Tunisia. People went into the streets. They wanted change. News about Tunisia traveled fast. Soon, people in other countries started to protest too. Big protests happened in Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain. There were also large protests in Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, Oman, and Sudan. Smaller protests happened in other Arab countries. Why were so many people unhappy? For a long time, many Arab countries had problems. Many leaders had been in power for many years, sometimes 30 or 40 years. They did not allow much freedom. People could not easily speak against the government or choose their leaders. There were not enough jobs, especially for young people. The cost of food was high. Many people were poor. Corruption was also a big problem. This means some people in power used their position unfairly to get money. People felt they had no dignity and wanted a better life. This time of protests and change became known as the Arab Spring. It was a series of actions by ordinary people across North Africa and the Middle East demanding change from their governments. It started in late 2010 and grew strong in 2011. The main goal for many protesters was to remove the old leaders and have more democracy and freedom. A famous slogan people shouted was Ashab Yurid Isq a Macron letter 1E60 Aneni letter 1E93 a Macron M. This means the people want to bring down the regime. In some countries, the protests worked. Leaders were forced to leave power in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. But the road to change was often difficult and sometimes violent. 2. Why people were angry. For many years before 2010, people in several Arab countries were not happy. There were many big problems that made them angry. One main problem was the leaders. Many leaders stayed in power for a very long time. For example, President Hosni Mubarak ruled Egypt for 30 years. In Tunisia, President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was leader for 23 years. Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was in power for 42 years, and Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh ruled for 33 years. People felt they had no say in who led their country. These leaders often had a lot of power and did not allow much freedom. Another big problem was jobs. It was very hard for people to find work, especially young people. Many young Arabs finished school or university but could not get a job. This made them feel hopeless about their future. At the same time, the cost of living was going up. Food prices became very high. Families found it difficult to buy enough food. This made life hard for ordinary people. People also had very little freedom. They could not speak freely about the government or its problems. If they complained, they could get into trouble. There were often human rights violations, meaning people's basic rights were not respected. Elections were often not free or fair, so people could not choose their leaders properly. Corruption was another reason people were angry. Many believed that government officials and leaders used their positions to take money for themselves. They felt the country's money was not being used to help the people, but to make the leaders rich. This stealing by people in power is called kleptocracy, and it was a serious issue in many places. This unhappiness was not sudden. There were signs of anger before the big protests started. In Tunisia, there were protests in the Gafsa mining area in 2008 because people were unhappy about jobs and conditions. In Egypt, workers organized many strikes and protests after 2004. A big strike was planned in the town of Mahala al-Kubra in 2008. In Algeria, there were thousands of small riots and protests about things like food costs and bad services in the years before 2011. In Western Sahara, people made a large protest camp called Jidaim Izik in late 2010 to ask for jobs and rights, but security forces destroyed it. These earlier events showed that people were already very unhappy. All these long-term problems, leaders staying too long, no jobs, high prices, no freedom, and corruption, built up over time and were the reasons why so many people wanted change. 3. Sharing the news online. The internet was very important during the Arab Spring. It helped people connect and talk to each other easily across cities and countries. Websites like Facebook and Twitter were used a lot. These websites are called social media. The number of people using social media in Arab countries more than doubled when the protests started. Only in Libya, its use did not grow as much. Social media helped people plan and organize protests. In Egypt and Tunisia, this was especially true. 9 out of 10 Egyptians and Tunisians who were asked said they used Facebook to organize demonstrations. They also used it to spread awareness and tell others what was happening. Many young Egyptians called themselves the Facebook generation. When the governments in Egypt and Tunisia tried to block Facebook, about 28% of Egyptians and 29% of Tunisians said this made it much harder to communicate and organize. Social media gave a space for groups like the April 6th youth movement in Egypt to plan actions. People also used the internet to share news very fast. They posted photos and videos showing the protests. They showed what the police or army were doing. This was important because governments often controlled the news on TV and in newspapers. The internet allowed people to share information without the government stopping it. This way, news that the government did not want people to know could spread quickly. For example, people created pages on Facebook to raise awareness about police hurting protesters in Egypt, like in the case of Khaled Mohammed Seed. Activists like Wael Ghanem used Facebook to share information. Websites like YouTube were also used to share video clips of events. Mobile phones were another very important tool. People used them to send text messages, make calls, and share information quickly with many others. In countries where fewer people used the internet, like Yemen and Libya, mobile phones and email were even more essential. These tools helped people inside these countries organize. They also helped them show the outside world what was happening during the protests. Big news channels like Al Jazeera also showed the protests to the world. They reported on the demonstrations in different countries. This meant people in other Arab countries, and people everywhere, could see the large crowds in places like Tahrir Square. They could understand what the protesters wanted. Seeing these reports helped spread the ideas and energy of the Arab Spring. In some places, like Cairo in Egypt, mosques were also used as places to coordinate protest actions. For Tunisia, the first change. The big changes started in Tunisia. It began with a man named Mohammed Bouazizi. He lived in a town called Sidi Bouzid. He was young but could not find a regular job. So he sold fruit and vegetables from a cart in the street. On December 17, 2010, a police officer took his cart and his products away. Mohammed Bouazizi felt very sad and angry. He felt he had no dignity. About an hour later, he went to a government building. He covered himself in gasoline and set himself on fire. Many people saw this happen or heard about it. It was a terrible shock. Mohammed Bouazizi was badly burned and died in hospital on January 4, 2011. His death made many Tunisians very angry about their own lives and the government. Soon after Bouazizi set himself on fire, protests started. First, they were in Sidi Bouzid, but they quickly spread to other cities and towns across Tunisia. Many kinds of people joined the protests: students, workers, lawyers, people without jobs, and activists. They marched together in the streets. They shouted slogans like Ashab Urid Isqa Macron letter 1E6D and NI letter 1E93A Macron M. This means the people want to bring down the regime. They demanded jobs, freedom, and respect. They were tired of corruption, high prices, and having no say in their country. These protests were the biggest Tunisia had seen in 30 years. The government tried to stop them. President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali had been in power for 23 years. His police and security forces fought with the protesters. It became violent. Reports said that more than 300 people were killed during the weeks of unrest. But the people did not stop protesting. Because the protests were so large and did not stop, President Ben Ali had to leave. On January 14, 2011, he fled the country. He went to Saudi Arabia. This was a huge moment for Tunisia. After Ben Ali left, things started to change quickly. A temporary government was put in place. Ben Ali's old political party, the RCD, was stopped and then closed down completely. The political police force, which many people feared, was also ended. Many political prisoners were let out of prison. For the first time, Tunisians could vote in free elections. On October 23, 2011, they chose people to write a new constitution. A political party called Ennahda received the most votes. In January 2014, Tunisia adopted its new constitution. This new set of rules aimed to protect human rights and make women more equal. Later, in 2014, Tunisia held elections for its parliament and a new president. The country completed its move towards democracy. Tunisia was the first country where people forced their leader out during the Arab Spring. This success gave hope to people in other Arab countries who also wanted change. 5. Egypt, a new start. People in Egypt saw what happened in Tunisia. They also wanted change in their country. On January 25, 2011, big protests started in Egypt. Many thousands of people came together. The most famous place for protests was Tahrir Square in the middle of Cairo, the capital city. The people had one main message. They wanted President Hosni Mubarak to leave his job. Mubarak was the leader of Egypt for 30 years. People were tired of his rule, corruption, and the lack of freedom and jobs. The government tried to stop the protests. Around midnight on January 28th, the government tried to stop the internet across the country. They wanted to make it hard for people to organize using websites like Facebook and Twitter, but people still came out onto the streets. President Mubarak tried to calm people down. He told his government ministers to leave their jobs. He also chose Omar Suleiman to be the vice president. It was the first time in almost 30 years that Egypt had a vice president. But the protests did not stop. They continued for 18 days. Huge crowds filled Tahrir Square and other cities. Finally, on February 11, 2011, Vice President Suleiman announced that President Mubarak was resigning. Mubarak left Cairo. The army took control of the country. A group of top army leaders called the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces became the new leaders. The army promised changes. They said they would lead Egypt to democracy. Soon after taking power, the army suspended the country's constitution. They also dissolved the parliament, which was the place where laws were made. The army promised to end the emergency law. This was a special law that had been in place for 31 years and gave the government extra powers. In March, the army appointed a new prime minister, Essam Sharaf, who was not from the army. Egypt had elections later. In June 2012, Mohamed Morsi won the election to become the new president. He was linked to a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. Many people hoped this was a real new start for Egypt. However, the path to democracy was difficult. Many people were still unhappy. Some worried the army had too much power or was too slow in making changes. There were more protests. Later, President Morsi himself faced large protests against his rule. In July 2013, the army removed President Morsi from power. The time after Mubarak left was full of challenges and more unrest. Hosni Mubarak himself later went to trial and was sentenced to life in prison for not stopping the killing of protesters during the first days of the revolution. 6. Protests in other countries. In Libya, protests began February 15, 2011. Soon the opposition controlled Benghazi. Leader Muammar Gaddafi fought back hard. Protests reached the capital, Tripoli. Gaddafi's son warned of civil war. Many people died. An opposition group, the National Transitional Council (NTC), formed. The United Nations Security Council allowed countries to help protect people, Resolution 1973. Countries like France, the UK, and the US bombed Gaddafi's forces. In August 2011, rebels took Tripoli. Gaddafi lost power after 42 years. NTC fighters found and killed him in Sirte in October 2011. But the country faced more fighting and problems after Gaddafi. Protests started in Yemen in January 2011. People were angry about President Ali Abdullah Saleh. They also protested against job problems and corruption. Big crowds demanded that Saleh leave power. Activist Tawakkol Karman helped organize protests. The government used violence against protesters. Saleh was injured in a bomb attack in June and went to Saudi Arabia. His vice president, Abdrabbuh Mansur Hadi, took charge. Sale returned in September. In November, Sale agreed to a plan from the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) to leave power. An election was held in February 2012. Hadi was the only candidate and won. Sale officially left power. But Yemen faced more crisis and civil war later. Protests in Syria started after police arrested children in Daraa in March 2011 for writing anti-government messages. Big protests spread to many cities. People demanded President Bashar al-Assad leave. The government answered with strong force, arresting thousands and using the army. In July, army tanks attacked cities like Hama, killing many. Some soldiers left the army and created the Free Syrian Army to fight the government. By 2012, the protests turned into a terrible civil war that lasted for many years. In Bahrain, protests began February 14, 2011. People asked for more political freedom and rights. The protests were mostly peaceful first. But on February 17th, police attacked protesters sleeping in Pearl roundabout in the capital, Manama, killing 4 people. Some protesters then demanded the king leave power. The government used more force. On March 14th, soldiers from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates came to help the government stop the protests. The government declared a state of emergency and cleared the protest camp. The Pearl Roundabout monument was destroyed. A report later found the government treated prisoners badly. Protests spread to other Arab countries too. In Jordan, King Abdullah changed the government several times and changed the constitution. In Morocco, King Mohammed VI also made political changes and brought in a new constitution. Algeria ended a 19-year state of emergency. Major protests also happened in Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, and Sudan, leading to some changes. Kuwait's prime minister resigned. Oman's leader gave some power to elected people. Smaller protests happened in Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, Djibouti, Lebanon, and Palestine. Saudi Arabia gave economic help and later promised women could vote. 7. After the protests. After the big protests of 2010 and 2011, many people hoped for a better future. But the time after the protests was difficult for many countries. Some people call this time the Arab Winter. This was a period with more violence and problems. In some countries, the protests led to long wars. Syria entered a terrible civil war that lasted for many years. Millions of people suffered. In December 2024, the government of Bashar al-Assad fell after rebels took control. Libya also faced a crisis and civil war after its leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was removed. Yemen also fell into a deep crisis and a civil war started there too. During this unstable time, extremist groups became stronger in some areas. One group was the Islamic State, also known as ISIS. It took control of parts of Syria and Iraq where governments were weak because of the fighting. Not all countries saw their leaders leave. Some governments stopped the protests using force. For example, in Bahrain, the government, with help from other countries like Saudi Arabia, stopped the protests. Some governments that saw changes at first went back to old ways. In Egypt, after President Hosni Mubarak left, the country elected Mohamed Morsi. But in 2013, after more large protests, the army removed Morsi from power. The results of the Arab Spring were very different from country to country. Tunisia was one success story. It created a new constitution in 2014 and held free elections. Tunisia built a new democracy, but in many other places there was continued fighting, instability, or strong government control. Years later, the problems that started the Arab Spring were still there in many countries. Because of this, new waves of protests started from around 2018. Some call this the Second Arab Spring. Big protests happened again in places like Sudan, Algeria, Iraq, and Lebanon. In Sudan, President Omar al-Bashir was removed from power in 2019 after huge protests. In Algeria, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika also had to leave in 2019. In Iraq and Lebanon, prime ministers resigned after people protested. These new protests showed that many people in the Arab world still wanted big changes in their countries. 8. What we learned. The Arab Spring was a very important time. It changed the Middle East and North Africa a lot, starting in 2010. Millions of people joined together. They asked for big changes in their countries. They wanted more rights, respect, and better lives. A famous chant heard in many places was, "The people want to bring down the regime." In some countries, the protests worked to change the government quickly. Leaders who were in power for many years lost their jobs. Zine El Abidine Ben Ali of Tunisia left in 2011. Hosni Mubarak of Egypt also left in 2011 after huge protests. In Libya, Muammar Gaddafi was removed and killed in 2011. Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen stepped down in 2012. These changes gave hope to many people. Tunisia started to build a new democracy after its leader left. People hoped for similar new starts in other countries. But the story was different in different places. In many countries, the hope for easy change did not last long. The time after the first protests is sometimes called the Arab Winter. This was because things became very difficult. Terrible civil wars started in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. These wars caused great suffering and are still problems today. Groups like ISIS became strong in some areas because the governments were weak. Some governments fought hard against the protesters. In Bahrain, the government stopped the protests with help from soldiers from other countries. In other places, governments became even stricter than before. Syria's protests turned into a very long war. That war only saw the fall of President Assad at the end of 2024, after 13 years of fighting. The Arab Spring showed that when many people demand change together, they can be very powerful. It showed that old ways of ruling could be challenged. But it also taught us that removing a leader is only the first step. Building a new, fair, and stable country is very hard. It takes a long time, and success is not guaranteed. The effects of this important time are still being seen today. What do you think is the biggest lesson from the different results in countries like Tunisia compared to Syria or Libya?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.